I don't expect you all to have read the book, so a word or two about the title. I think it was about 2014, a couple of years after Peter's death, that I was interviewed by Premier Radio, who wanted to know how Peter's death had affected my faith. And in trying to answer that question, I found myself telling the interviewer that I had needed God to be bigger and wilder. I think it's true to say that over the years since then, it's really largely pilgrimage that has enabled me to discover and experience God in new and more visceral ways, whether that's on windswept coastal paths, wading through mud or icy water on the way to Lindisfarne, feeling the heat and the thirst of a Palestinian midday, gazing out at a sparkling sea on the beach at Whithorn, and many other experiences. So Bigger and Wilder felt like the right title, although I still feel I've really only begun to scratch the surface of what it means to encounter a bigger and wilder God. I know that there is a strong thread of grief that runs through the book, but I do hope it also captures something of the joy of the pilgrim life, as well as the sense that there's always more. The end of every journey is the beginning of the next.
You know, pilgrimage, the word pilgrimage and its synonyms, journeying, going on the way, and so on, are so much part of our language these days. And certainly my 10 journeys on parts of the various Caminos have brought me in contact with folk whose lives have been completely changed by this idea of taking the minimum of things they need on their backs and walking till their feet hurt, walking till they're exhausted, being people of the way with the minimum of stuff with them. So pilgrimage is something that I think appeals to what Jill calls the restlessness inside ourselves. It's really a very important thing, I think, in today's world. And I think we very often use the journey of life. We talk about the way we are on, which is the same metaphor. And of course, there are those of us who go on pilgrimages we did not want at all, such as Jill and Andrew and Tim have been on. There are many people in our world who are on pilgrimage and on journeys because they have to leave the place which is home for them, whether because of drought or civil war or whatever, or economics. We in Ireland have taken in many, many Ukrainian people, and they'll be here for a long time with us. So people are on the move. Perhaps people have always been on the move, but we're more conscious of it now through social media and other things.
I was to some extent a bit surprised when the book, and when we started talking, and Jill, you told me what the book was about, because in my head, those two words, Methodism and pilgrimage, didn't necessarily come out in the same breath. But that is certainly something that you have given to those who will read the book, and to those of us who have already read it. Pilgrimage is in many ways a topic of the moment. How is this book different? In some ways, as a religious publisher, it would be very easy to think, oh no, not another book about pilgrimage. And there are a lot of them out there. But this book is genuinely different, not only because you make that connection with your own tradition, where maybe pilgrimage wasn't something that, came with your, that you've been growing up with, but you discovered it, as so many people do, through that very painful experience in your life and the life of your family, of Peter's death, and the way you tell that story of your own growing into pilgrimage and exploring what that means. You do that in a way that I think opens it up for other people as well to think through, well, what are those pilgrim journeys in my life? How can I explore that bigger and wilder God?
And over the years, I've walked many of them with my Anglican colleagues from the cathedral, but my roots are Methodist. I'm Methodist through and through, and I continue to strive for a better understanding of what pilgrimage means to Methodists. And that's why I was so pleased to go on the pilgrimage that was led by Jill to the Holy Island a few years ago now with a group of Methodist women. And that's where I posed that exact question to Jill. So what does pilgrimage mean to Methodists? Now, I've decided not to answer that now because I know that our next speaker is going to address that. So I'm going to leave that for him. But just a few thoughts from me. Most of the pilgrimages I have been on have a theme, sometimes linked to a historic event or a person, quite often a saint. And so that sense of treading where the saints and countless pilgrims have trod gives me a real sense of being the way we're just a little tiny part, our lives are a tiny little part of a huge, wonderful creation. And I get a real sense of connection with the past, but also the fact that you're here in the present, moving and walking forwards, and hopefully just leaving a very light footprint on our earth. That's very important to me as well. Following that is a real sense of the continuity of prayer. Every pilgrimage is surrounded by prayer, but I think each pilgrimage is influenced very strongly by the people leading it, by the people taking part, and the places that you pass through. So you get this real mix of really deep personal prayers, but prayers for the communities that you pass through, people who you perhaps know nothing about, but you have to balance those types of prayers side by side. And for me, that sense that thousands of prayers have been prayed in these places before is a really important part of pilgrimage for me. And for me, the key moment of a pilgrimage is listening to the noise of the footsteps in front of you and behind you. And for me, that gives you a real sense of journeying. And that for me really does resonate with my understanding of being a Methodist. We're a church on the move. So pilgrimage, I thoroughly recommend it. And I recommend Jill's book too.
One of the privileges of my role is sometimes welcoming guests from overseas. And we have been planning this week a visit from the Secretary of Conference and others of another Methodist connection. And one of the things that we're thinking we will do with them is take them to Bristol. Only Methodism could name its oldest building the New Room. But we plan to take them there, where they will join many others who would count themselves as pilgrims. Because people come from around the world to see the places of significance of the birth of Methodism, of the evangelical revival of the 18th century. And what those people are saying, consciously or not, is because of what happened here, we are now people of faith. And standing where our forebears stood anchors us in our tradition. It reinforces our sense of belonging, and it renews our sense of identity. And that often is what pilgrims find when they reach the pilgrim destination, the places which we've heard where prayer has been valid. At various points in the book, Jill asks about the interconnectedness of her Methodism and her pilgrim experience. Of course, Methodism was born at a time when pilgrimage had nothing like the popularity it has today. Very few people, in fact, practically nobody, was walking the road to Santiago de Compostela in the 18th century. And early Methodism would have inherited a Reformation suspicion of pilgrimage as a religious practice. None of that, though, deterred John Wesley from travelling to Herrnhut shortly after his Aldersgate experience to visit the cradle of the Moravian movement, to which he owed so much. As I reflected on it, it seemed to me that much in Methodism does make us pilgrims, whether we ever take our staff and script and leave the comfort of our homes. What are we doing when we mark May the 24th each year, if not confessing that our faith owes something to what happened in 1738? What are we doing when we sing Wesley hymns, if not anchoring ourselves in the tradition? What are we doing when, as I did yesterday, we say our covenant prayer, if not renewing our sense of identity? It may be, as Jill points out, a serendipitous accident that for so long Methodism shared the scalloped shell as its symbol. But Methodists are pilgrims. And I hope that this book encourages more of them to take the staff and script to express that identity.
Jill, I was absolutely fascinated in reading the first two chapters, where in 20 pages you cover the Old and the New Testament, to see how that four-stage model of departure, journey, encounter, and transformation pitted so naturally and with no sense of being forced upon the biblical record. When you came to the New Testament section in the second of those two chapters, rather than offering us reflections on individuals, as you had done with the Old Testament section, you chose to focus on 3 words and 1 phrase. And those words were, yes, peregrination, exodus, the sense of being on the road was your phrase, and then seeking. And as I've read the book, not only in that chapter on the New Testament, but also later in the book, words and phrases seem to be very significant. And I wonder how important and significant has been the offering to people of a word or a phrase to carry with them for that day. How significant do you feel that's been?
Yeah, I think it has. Thank you for homing in on that, Peter. I think often on pilgrimage, there is so much that you sort of want people to experience and take in and see and feel and touch and taste. And sometimes it's all too much, especially if, you know, if they've come on this pilgrimage with other concerns, anxieties maybe. But one word, most of us can manage to remember one word each day. And it's very often that word, well, I usually try to choose words that in somehow fit the stage of the journey. I can often think of the terror I've seen in people's eyes as I've told them in the morning that the word for the day is courage, and they've wondered what it is that they're going to have courage for. But I suppose in a way it's a distillation. The words are a kind of distillation of the whole sense of learning that I've had over the last 10 years. And some of those words, like courage, like attentiveness, are really important to me now and have really sort of soaked into my DNA, and they're the words by which I live, I guess.
There's a kind of a similarity there, isn't there, between the travelling light. You know, we have to carefully select what luggage we're going to carry with us because we carry it all the time, and there's that jettison of things. And I sense that, in a sense, that word or that phrase that we're given and offered as a gift for the day helps us to travel lightly, because, as you say, we come with all sorts of other things on our minds and our hearts. Yes,
I hope so. I think well, I write a lot in the book about travelling light, and I think it is important. It's one of the reasons I steadfastly resist the services which will take your bag from one place to the next, because I know that if we could do that, we would all bring far more than we really need. And that whole idea of learning to live with the minimum, not just on pilgrimage, but learning that as a life skill, I think it is one of the great gifts of pilgrimage. And so, yeah, I think there's a point in the book where I say that the word liminality, which is one of my favorites, I never used as a word for the day because I think 5 syllables is too much to carry around.
Yeah, I'm just on a sort of different aspect now of pilgrimage and the experience of pilgrimage. When I've been away on retreat or on a pilgrimage, I've often been accosted on my return with the question, how has your spiritual top-up been? I've somewhat rebelled against the idea of a spiritual top-up to keep me going. And so I've been really drawn to that fourth phase of the pilgrim experience, that of transformation. And I wonder, how has engaging with pilgrimage transformed and shaped daily life in what we might call normal time or ordinary time for you? And perhaps, if you're able, from testimony of those that have been on pilgrimage with you, what's been that transformation that has impacted and continues to feed their and your daily ordinary time journeys?
Thank you for raising that, Peter. I do sense a real risk of sort of going from one pilgrimage to the next, and that, as you say, it becoming like a filling up, a top-up station. And yeah, no, I would say that. Well, I would definitely say that the left foot, right foot is with me every day. So courage and this left foot, right foot, this sense that the only way to get through hard or challenging experiences is to take the next step, however small and tentative that may be. Yeah, that gets me out of bed on the mornings when I wish I didn't have to get out of bed. And you ask about other people. Yes, I mean, I have been privileged to, all the people who've come with me have been wonderful, even just for being willing to come. And many of them have shared stories afterwards. I think of one woman in particular who came on a pilgrimage. She'd never done anything like that before. She was dealing with some issues in her personal life and her spiritual life. But that week together on the way, surrounded by a supportive company of pilgrims, people who she had hardly known at all before she came, it was a truly transformational week for her. And I think allowed her to release things from the past, perhaps again back to that living lightly, allowed her to put things down which she'd been carrying for a long time, and I do believe give her a different future from what might have been.
Yeah, I think I would echo that, and there are things that from the pilgrimage that I did with you that have shaped and continue to shape how I encounter things day by day. So I'd like to say a huge thank you on behalf of those that have probably pilgrimed with you, that we have been transformed by those pilgrimages. And I know, and it's clear from reading your book, that Lindisfarne has been a particularly significant place. And I wonder if you'd like to read from your book about a particular experience of crossing to Lindisfarne, because I think that is such a powerful part of the book for me and the journey.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I have to say that crossing along the Pilgrim Poles to Lindisfarne is one of my most sort of liminal spaces and spiritual spaces. And often pilgrims come and they're nervous about that part of the week particularly, but almost without fail say afterwards that it transcended any of their fears and hopes. I usually allow about 90 minutes for the crossing with a group, but as I recall in the book, and yes, thank you, I'll read a short section now. Andrew and I once made that crossing in 40 minutes in very exceptional circumstances. It was February, Storm Henry was raging most strongly in the northeast of England, and as we approached the shore of the mainland, Andrew and I convinced each other that it would be foolhardy to cross by the poles, and we decided that we would walk on the metalled road on this occasion. Yet somehow as we crossed the bridge, we both found ourselves climbing down onto the sand and removing our boots after all. And it was a remarkable experience, blown along by gale force winds, thankfully behind us. We found ourselves running at times with the sense that we could either keep pace with the wind, the spirit, or be blown over. And some words from the prayer that's used annually on Christmas Eve in King's College, Cambridge, were in my mind, about remembering those who rejoice with us, but upon another shore and in a greater light. And that sense of crossing from one shore to another, being somehow akin to the crossing from life to death, was never more real than on that windswept February day as we headed for a silvery light which seemed to cling to the shore of Holy Island beyond the grey mudflats around us. The noise of the wind made speech impossible, and we didn't stop to sing or pray. But Andrew said later that he had almost expected Peter to be awaiting us when we reached dry land. Such was the liminality of the experience. A shore that will complete us, indeed.
And so we come to the last section of the book, the epilogue. And Jill asks herself and the reader to test all that's gone before. Does it work in the sometimes harsh experience of the messiness of human life? she draws us into her story, shrouded in the cloud of Peter's death, and allows us to travel with her through these last 11 years. Will those biblical pioneers of pilgrimage have anything to say? Will the experience of walking with pilgrims to Lindisfarne or along the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem speak to her? Will that fourfold pattern of departure, pilgrim path, sacred centre, ending and beginning work as she tries to find a way through the forest or on the mountain slopes of grief? The epilogue is really Jill's testimony, taking us into her very personal space in which she is learning to live round the reality of sickening grief. Would she ever be able to live again? She takes us into the years which have followed her previous book, Thanks Be to God. And she has indeed encountered the God who needed to be bigger and wilder. We're taken to wild places and quiet places. We share in encounters with people who bless and who curse. We go up to the heights and down to the depths. We share in joy and pain, celebration and disappointment. We find solitude and companionship. It's a pilgrimage which was not welcome, through which Jill has been transformed in her encounter with this bigger and wilder God. Of course, in reading it, I was prompted to tears. I've been making a journey alongside hers, and she doesn't shrink from the pain as well as the treasure of darkness. I also found myself chuckling, prompted by that dry sense of humour, which for Jill is never far away. The epilogue, you see, acknowledges there is no formula for solving the mystery of grief, no map to guide you through its maze, but it whispers a message which encourages us to choose courage and step out, left foot, right foot, breathe in, breathe out on the pilgrim path. A pilgrimage of grief is possible and has taken Jill in heart, mind, and sometimes body over snow-clad summits, through head-high bracken, wading knee-deep through mud. There may still be far to travel, and more sadness to enjoy, and possibly more glory to glimpse. The epilogue allows us to accompany Jill on a pilgrimage in the raw. She is keeping alive the sound of God's footsteps, sometimes plodding, sometimes skipping alongside. And that God is bigger and wilder. Thanks, Jill, for allowing us to walk with you through the pages of this epilogue.
I was privileged to be one of Jill's early companions on the pilgrim path to Lindisfarne, to Holy Island. And it came just at the right time for me, as I was needing courage and direction as I contemplated a new and challenging leadership role. And I vividly remember Jill encouraging us each to take a turn at the front of the band of pilgrims, to experience what it was like to be out in front as leader, as well as in the middle or in the back, at the back of the line of pilgrims. It was a significant experience for me. And I was thrilled to receive a copy of Jill's latest book and revisit in my imagination the signposts for pilgrimage. It feels to me that every part of this book is a resource for the church and for individuals but perhaps the appendix sections are most clearly aimed at resourcing all of us to explore the practice of pilgrimage. Jill's ideas for pilgrimage on the doorstep, under the headings of place, people, and purpose, certainly trigger ideas for what we might do in our local communities. I have never thought of walking a labyrinth in the dark, for instance, but I might try. I also realised that our organised church walks could take on a new flavour if they were planned with the concept of pilgrimage in mind. Jill even provides a set of questions to stimulate creative ideas for initiating a local pilgrimage. For example, she asks, or encourages us to ask, where is your holy place, sacred centre, important site near where you live? Could that site become part of a pilgrimage? If you asked your congregation, group, or friends the same question, what might result? I still remember the set of prayer stations on the theme of pilgrimage that Jill produced for a Methodist Women in Britain weekend at Swanwick. Her notes in this book are so detailed that even I feel I could have a go, or at least I could reproduce such prayer stations with a team of enthusiasts to help me. Jill's Act of Worship for Pilgrims, that was first published in Magnet magazine, is typically creative and interactive. All pilgrimage, the planning and the participation, will inevitably be soaked in prayer. And examples of prayers are included along with suggestions for useful hymns, poetry, and books. So thank you, Jill, for your attention to detail, your courage in writing the book, and the mixture of willingness to encourage us to get lost if necessary. Thank you for continuing to encourage and resource the whole church to engage in pilgrimage adventures and discover that bigger and wilder God. So let's finish our gathering with one of the prayers featured in Jill's book. Let's pray. Christ, who is the way, reveal yourself to me today and guide each step I take. Christ, who is the truth, forgive me when I pretend to be your friend and fail to love my neighbour. Christ, who is the life, thank you for companions whose faith enlivens mine, although the road be hard. This day, may I prove faithful, press on towards your welcome light, and know your presence in each blessed hour. Amen.